Hello there, and welcome to our course, Build with Bootstrap. I'll be your course instructor, Brock Nunn. Throughout this course, we'll be discussing Twitter Bootstrap. It's a front-end CSS and JavaScript framework that powers a multitude of sites, modern and responsive. Since its initial development, Bootstrap has curated an enormous community that follows it really passionately. One of the benefits of curating such a large community is having incredibly active development. This means that for front-end designers around the world, Bootstrap remains relatively modern, new, and up-to-date with all of the latest web design trends, including responsiveness and accessible web design. And before you get worried, I understand what you're thinking. With using a front-end framework, it's easy to make a samey-looking site. However, throughout this course, I'm going to help you understand how to not only create your site with Bootstrap, but to also customize it to look exactly like you or your client needs it to look. Throughout this course, we're not only talking theory. In fact, we're going to build our own website with Twitter Bootstrap and show you how, in practice, you can create a great-looking site. In fact, let's talk about some of the things that you will be learning. We're going to set up our files for a modern web application. So I'm going to show you what my favorite practices for my startup files are. And it's not just getting the default Bootstrap files. I'm going to show you where to go and what to get to set up a website using static files that will perform well in any server environment. Also, we're going to delve deeper into the language that's behind Bootstrap itself, the less pre-processing language. If you're not already pre-processing your CSS, I'm going to show you exactly how to get started doing it. We'll show how powerful it is to use less to customize Twitter Bootstrap and your site in general. If you're already familiar with the less pre-processing language, you might find it interesting just how easy it is to integrate Bootstrap with less and then customize your website even more. In the main build of our site, we are going to create together a full marketing website for a fictional client. I'll walk you through my workflows and maybe give you a few tips for how I handle client requirement. As we all know, no one framework is a one-stop shop, and Bootstrap is no exception. We're going to extend Bootstrap using icon fonts and additional JavaScript. Extending Bootstrap in a friendly manner that works well with the code that is already there is an excellent way to add more functionality to Bootstrap's stellar codebase. Once we complete our final build, we're going to tackle modern web deployment. While we won't be using technologies such as Git, we are going to be taking a look at things like file minification, image optimization, as well as simple management techniques using PHP and the includes. Also, best practices when it comes to uploading your final site and getting it ready for life on the server. Let's take a look at what our site is going to look like. Our fictional company is called ClearStep. Using Twitter Bootstrap, we're going to integrate a lot of advanced functionality, such as a homepage slider, an interesting call to action. We're going to use Twitter Bootstrap's thumbnail functionality, as well as including our own coloring through the use of the less pre-processing language. We're going to create our own about page as well, showing how we can highlight featured content and extend Bootstrap using things like icon fonts. And I know it wouldn't be a modern website if we had left out responsiveness, which of course we didn't do. You'll notice that as we shrink the size of ClearStep, our page is responding in kind. We include responsive navigation as well as items that lay out depending on what size our screen is. Right now is the best possible time to be diving into Bootstrap, and there's no better way to get started than going to the source itself. To do that, simply go to getbootstrap.com. When you're ready, head on over to the next video and we'll begin our first build with Bootstrap. Hi guys, and welcome back. So, in building our website with Twitter Bootstrap, remember, Our goal here is to create a dynamic and useful website for the company ClearStep. To get started, we need to actually download Bootstrap, and you get it, that's as simple as it sounds. Simply go to getbootstrap.com and head right down to the Download Bootstrap button. For a moment though, we should note that you can always go to the Customize feature featured within Twitter Bootstrap, the website, and you can customize the entirety of the script using their online graphical user interface to your needs. But in this case, we're actually going to do most of the customizing ourselves, using the less pre-processing language. But first, let's go over to just the plain Bootstrap homepage and download Twitter Bootstrap. As you can see, it's a pretty light download. We'll simply drag that on over to our desktop and unpack it. Okay, let's see what we have in here. Looks like we have a Bootstrap master folder, including several packages. So what this is actually the whole of Twitter Bootstrap, including all the documentation. Now, we don't really need that. In fact, let's just take a few of these. We're going to grab the less files, and we're going to grab the, under distribution, we're going to grab the JavaScript files. So JS, we should find Bootstrap and bootstrap.min. Now that has all of the Bootstrap JavaScript functions that you'll need. So we'll go to the distribution files and simply extract the JavaScript. Once we have those, we can get started with building out the folder structure for our website, ClearStep. Now, for any front-end design and development that I do, I like to start with something rather solid. And my favorite tool to start with is a little tool called HTML5 Boilerplate. You can go there by going to html5boilerplate.com. Once you're here, this should be rather familiar. We can get a custom build or just download it plain. For instance, our custom build, we can make sure it has all of the things that we need. We can download something preloaded with Bootstrap, but that comes with more hard-coded Bootstrap CSS and is not necessarily what we're needing right off the bat. For now, we'll just start with the classic HTML5 boilerplate. We can choose the things that we need. For instance, we can have no template whatsoever since we're going to be using our own template structure. We do want Modernizer, and we do want minified jQuery, just to be safe. Also, we'll go ahead and include a plugins.javascript in case there are any other plugins that we need to include in our Bootstrap site outside of what we're already using. So, we can get started by downloading that right now. Once it's downloaded, we'll extract it, grab all of our files. So I'm going to create a new folder on our desktop called ClearStep. Now that I have that, I'm going to extract all of our files out to the primary folder. So let's open up ClearStep and see what we have. We have a CSS, images, and JavaScript. In this case, we're going to be adding in our less folder, and that's going to be brand new, but we're also going to be overriding this JavaScript with our own JavaScript. But before we do that, let's make sure that we have a few things that we're going to need. Okay, it looks like we have a vendor section, and that holds our jQuery and Modernizer. That's good. Main and plugins.js. So we don't want to override all of this quite yet. In fact, let's just combine it to include our Bootstrap JavaScript. So we'll move our Bootstrap right into our main folder, and that'll be that. So now we have successfully downloaded HTML5 boilerplate and connected the Bootstrap files that we're going to need with our primary folder. So let's launch our index.html and see what we have. There we go. Hello world, this is HTML5 boilerplate. And you'll notice that this is not at all styled yet by CSS or by the Bootstrap framework. We're going to correct that in our very next video when I'll show you how to integrate the Twitter Bootstrap and bring in the hooks for all of our scripts and all of our JavaScript into our main file. Welcome back. Let's get started connecting our Twitter Bootstrap site to the HTML5 boilerplate template that we've downloaded. You'll notice right now that whenever we inspect our elements and go into our console that we've found that we're actually failing to load a few resources, and that's okay, we're anticipating this. Throughout this course, I'm going to be using a front-end code editor inspired by Bootstrap called Brackets. If you'd like to know a little bit more about Brackets, let's Google it. You can go to brackets.io, and you can see that it's an open source code editor. Now, Adobe also has a version of this called Adobe Edge Code. Brackets is a front-end code editor made for the web, and it's actually built using technologies that build the web itself. It's under really active development. It features a lot of forward-looking technologies such as live reload, code hinting, and it even does some cool little tricks that help you adjust your CSS while looking at your HTML, which I think is pretty neat. Besides, the first few versions of Brackets were inspired stylistically by Bootstrap itself in its earlier incarnations. So I think Brackets is the perfect code editor to get started using our site with. So we'll go down and we'll open Brackets. Next thing, we'll drag in ClearStep, and as you can see, here is our ClearStep folder. We'll open up our index.html, and let's take a look at this. We have our standard header, our body tag that we're closing right here. We also have in our footer region, or below at the very bottom of our site, we have our links to jQuery. Also, in the case that jQuery might fail, we'll go ahead and write the localized version of jQuery found within our vendor folder. Next, we have our plugins.javascript and our main.javascript. So, in order to get Bootstrap completely plugged in, we'll need to make a few adjustments. First things first, though, let's give our website a title. So in this case, we'll give our website the title of our company itself, ClearStep. Let's go through. Next, it looks like we have a link to a style sheet called normalize.min. And that's fine. However, Bootstrap is actually going to help us normalize our website anyway, so let's go ahead and delete that. Perfect, that's been deleted. We also have main, where you can imagine that we might customize our Bootstrap site using alternative styles than we might find normally in Bootstrap, so we'll leave the main.css for now. Next, we can see that we have our JavaScript within our vendors folder. We have Modernizer. We use Modernizer to check for things that we might need to make something like a polyfill in older browsers. So think about Internet Explorer 6, Internet Explorer 7, all the way even through IE8 and some other forms of browsers that might be a little bit more, legacy. If we need to make browser-specific adjustment, Modernizer is a great way to detect the browser themselves and then also to help us deliver the scripts or the styles that we're going to need. So this looks good. We have our Chrome frame alert for Internet Explorer. Oh, and we also have this jQuery call for the server, but since we're developing on a Windows machine, you may not have to do this with a Mac. I'm going to have to go ahead and put an HTTPS : / to the beginning of this address so that we can actually get to the version off of the server. My local machine just wants me to be able to connect to secure. Alright, so everything else looks good. Let's add a new script so we can copy this script and place it right above the plugins. And we're just going to call this bootstrap.min. It's perfect. That corresponds to this bootstrap.min.js file, and that's going to pull that right there in our script. It's important to note that you should pull up the bootstrap.min after jQuery has already been called, but before plugins and main. We might be using plugins and main to alter the behavior of JavaScript that we find within the bootstrap.min. It's just a good practice. Next, we can see that we have a Google Analytics script that's all set up. For now, we're going to get rid of this, but I really encourage you, any website that you build, go ahead and set up Google Analytics for it using a similar code structure to this. It's just a good idea and a good practice. Let's see, we'll save that. All right, that's saved. And we need to finish this out by adding our Bootstrap styles. So we can copy this link rel and paste it in. So we have link rel style sheet, so that's correct. href, css to main.css. Of course, now we'll be adding our bootstrap.css. So if we navigate into our CSS folder, we see that there's no bootstrap.css right now, and that's okay, because we're actually going to be using the less language to pre-process in our new bootstrap.css file. We haven't gone over there yet, but that's exactly what we're going to do in our very next video. Hi there and welcome back. Alright, so we've talked about it and now we actually need to set up Bootstrap within our less infrastructure. So to learn a little bit more about less, you can head over to lesscss.org. Here you can find out that it's a dynamic style sheet language. It helps us treat style sheets a little bit more like JavaScript. In that we can use things like variables, mix-ins, other technology to be able to adjust our style sheets more intelligently. It's a lot of fun to use and I really encourage you to get into it, and hopefully throughout this course I'll help you get a little bit more familiar with less and its benefits. But for right now, let's integrate less and use some of that intelligent pre-processing to help us enhance our website. On Windows, I'm going to be using an application called Prepros. Prepros is an application that's actually going to do some of the pre-processing of our less files locally on our desktop. Prepros is a brand new Windows local preprocessor. On the Mac, I encourage you to go take a look at CodeKit. It's just like it says, it's like steroids for web developers. It's an incredible app that does a lot of the thinking for you. It does cost a little bit of money, but I really encourage you to take a look. If you don't want to use Prepros, there is an application called WinLess. It's a general user interface, or graphical user interface, for less as a pre-processing language right on your Windows desktop. But Prepros provides a lot of enhancements even over WinLess with some other files and some other things that you can do. So if you're on a Windows computer, I really recommend, at least for this time, that you use Prepros. If you're on a Mac, you cannot go wrong with CodeKit. So now let's integrate our site with Prepros. We'll do that by taking ClearStep, the folder, and just dragging it into our new project. You can see that Prepros kind of goes through and it skims our site and it finds some things that we might want it to process in the future. We have bootstrap.less and theme.less, so that's looking good. We also have our main.javascript that we might want to compile or manage variable names. That's really wonderful, as well as our Bootstrap that we might want to do the same. Bootstrap.less is one that we will want to compile, but we can also see that by default we'll be compiling Bootstrap.less to css/bootstrap.css. That works out really well for our purposes. Within that, we might want to make some smart decisions first. Let's compress our CSS and also auto-prefix our CSS. That might help us along the line. We don't need line numbers or necessarily strict maths, but we do want it to auto-compile every time we save. So this is looking good. Let's compile it for the first time. We can see that our compilation was successful, and let's check out our folder structure. If we go into our CSS, we can see that we've created a bootstrap.css. Let's take a look at it within the brackets development. We'll go to CSS and we can see that we're not showing anything quite yet, but if we refresh our file tree by right-clicking, we can see our bootstrap.css. Bootstrap.css is made of a minified bunch of CSS, which is exactly what we need, because really, we want our code to be as small and compact as possible whenever it's on the server. We don't actually need to see it in its regular CSS form. We're going to be editing our site, though, within all of its less forms, which, as you'll see if you go into the less file structure, a lot of different elements. You can see here that using less, we can zone in on things like alerts and badges and carousels and even buttons. We can do large-scale changes using very little code and then process all of those changes using Prepros or CodeKit if you're on the Mac to our final bootstrap.css. Then once we deploy our site to the browser, our code is going to be so tiny and our site is going to be very performant, which is important whenever we're dealing with this more broad scope of devices such as mobile and tablets. We want our code to be performant. Finally, let's head up back to our index.html file and save one last time. Once we've saved it, let's see if we can generate a live preview within our browser using the live preview function of brackets. There we are. We have our live preview, and that looks a little bit different. I wonder what's changed. So now if we go to inspect our elements, let's pop this out and let's view this code. We have our bootstrap.min, plugins, and main. From the console, we can see that nothing is failing. And then whenever we go through to the head, let's see if Bootstrap is being brought up. And it looks like not much is being shown. However, the comments are intact, except for we have this one line here. Let's see where that goes. Using this one line, we can see that our code is actually just being minified to one single line of CSS, no matter how many lines of CSS within our less document that we are using. So Bootstrap is successfully being brought up. Also, we have our main.css and our modernizer.min. So it looks like we're all hooked up and we're ready to get customizing on our site. In our next video, we're actually going to get started building our website, starting with the front page of ClearStep. So I hope you're excited to jump in. All right, it's time to start building our homepage, start building our site. And the way I like to do it, and everyone kind of has their own particular ways that they like to do things, and if you already have your own, don't feel the need to follow along directly with me, kind of just take whatever path you're comfortable with. However, I like to build my pages by first starting out with an image. Sometimes I have a Photoshop document. In this case, I just have a normal PNG image that I have open on my desktop, and I like to just work from left to right. I keep the items on the right of the finished image just as a guide to make sure that I'm using good semantics and I'm using proper markup in my web page all the way through. Before we get to coding though, let's talk about structure. At the top of our site, we have a fixed navbar. This navbar, we anticipate, is going to continue to scroll down the page with us as we move down. We'll always have our navigation with us, and that's just good UI. Next, we have our front page slideshow. This isn't necessarily going to be consistent across every single page that we do, but for our home page, it's a good start. We'll keep that slideshow and we'll use the built-in Bootstrap slider for that. Next, we have a general call to action, 3 thumbnails that can be features or other important things about a business or a person that would be applicable to put on the home page that really need to stand out. Next, we have our footer. It's pretty trendy right now to divide footers into 2 areas. You have one area for content, and then the next for what I like to call kind of credits. Think of those as something in the end of the movie. You know, you get credits at the end of the movie, and in the same way, you get just the important things and who's responsible and who actually owns this website at the end of our site. So that works. Also, you should take note that we will be using social network integration through links. So in this case, we will be using the icon fonts or font awesome icon fonts to integrate dynamic fonts and font sizes to be able to grow or shrink according to the device that we're using responsive design. So let's start filling out our site with content. Now, Bootstrap is famous for its ability to be a fast prototyping tool. And one of the most effective ways to take advantage of that is to actually head over to the Bootstrap documentation. In order to get there, head over to getbootstrap.com/components. Here you can find the CSS, components, and JavaScript. Since we need to integrate the navigation, we'll be using the components section. It's pretty easy to get around. First, we'll head over to navbar. As you can see, this navbar looks a whole lot like the navbar that we need to integrate within our page. In fact, it's the same navigation bar that's being used at the top of their own site. So, we know that our navbar is going to be easy to copy and paste in by just copying this block of text, and let's go ahead and paste that right in. Let's see what that gives us on our live page. So we'll refresh. Looks like we have our brand, a few links, even a search form, and some more links in a drop-down menu. So everything is pulling and acting correctly. We also note that we have full responsiveness with our navigation. So this is all very good news. However, our navigation isn't black or it isn't dark, and also it still has these rounded edges. That's because we're not using the fixed navigation bar. We can do that now. By going further down into the Bootstrap documentation, simply go down to the fixed to top and add navbar fixed to top, that class, to the nav class. So we'll head on in here, find our nav with our class, the one that's wrapping our entire navbar, and simply paste in navbar fixed top. Paste that in, go back, refresh, and alright, there we go. Our navbar no longer has the rounded edges, but we do have still this light color, and we'll fix some of that in styling in just a little bit. Alright, let's continue marking up our home page. So after our navbar, we have our slider. But as you can see, our slider actually fits within what our page is contained. So we have Bootstrap provides us a class of container. So we just have to mark up div class equal to container. Now I always like to comment out my divs. There we are. Alright, so within this container, I'm also going to add a class of page content. So page content. Alright, so we have our navbar complete, and we've opened up the container for the rest of our site, for our page content. In the next video, we'll be adding our slider, our call to action, as well as our thumbnail feature. So when you're ready to continue on, head over to the next video, and we'll pick up where we left off. Welcome back, and let's continue to work on our homepage. What we need to set up now is our slider, our call to action, as well as our homepage features. But before we even get started with that, we need to discuss the Bootstrap grid. Now, a grid is something used by web designers and even print designers that helps us to structure our content in a way that makes sense, in a way that feels weighted properly across the page. In the case of Bootstrap, they're organized in a 12-column fashion, which is pretty common across the industry. So take this slider, for example. This stretches the full width of the page, and so we would consider this to stretch or to fill up a full 12 columns. Whereas our features, they each take up 1/3 of the page, so out of 12, we would anticipate that they would each take up only 4 columns. And you can imagine how this sort of math can really get fun whenever you're structuring your content across the website. Also, it should be noted that whenever we go into responsive design, we can restructure and we can tell our elements to do different things at smaller sizes, which really helps us out whenever we're structuring our user experience. So to begin structuring the rest of our page, it's good to understand Bootstrap portions in rows. So imagine that we're taking little blocks and just filling up our site. A row is anywhere that our page is filled within the full 12 columns. So our slider will start with a row and then it will end with a row. And you can kind of imagine these imaginary lines across that content. With that in mind, I'm going to open up a div with a class of hero and row. The hero class we'll use to style our content, while the row is used for Bootstrap functionality. And hero. So we always know that we're going to end the hero portion of our website right there. Alright, so now we need the code for our slider from the Bootstrap website. So we can copy that and paste that on into our page. Now in the items that I have pasted, I've actually already gone in and added our images. So we have our H3, H1, and H2. Those are the titles that I gave those images. But let's not just copy and paste. Let's actually go over so we understand this code a little bit better. Of course, we have our hero row, and then we go into our div with the ID of carousel example generic, just like we found in the example code. It has, however, a functional class, the thing that makes it run, with a class of carousel and slide. Then we have an ordered list of carousel indicators. These are the buttons or little dots that we can use to indicate where in our slideshow the user is at. That can be found at the very first, right here in the ordered list. Next, we have the wrapper for our slide. So it starts with carousel inner, and this can fit anything that we actually want to put in our carousel outside, including other HTML elements, so you can add in captions and headings, paragraph text, and more. For now, we're actually going to take all of these out since we just want those 3 marketing images. Looks good. All right, and then we just have our image. Now, one thing I would recommend is that you add an alt tag and then also a title for your images. That's just good SEO, and it's good practice for whenever you're running a production site. Next, we have our controls, our right and left arrows that indicate to the user if they want to go left and, of course, or right. It puts the user in control, and we like that. So let's save our page and quickly run out to the browser, refresh, and it looks like we have a working carousel. This is looking good. We're almost there. We're going right down the list, getting to our finished homepage. So after our hero, we've ended this row. So it'd be good after that to start up just another row. This allows us to safely use a full 12 columns. Before we go any further, we need to discuss the ins and outs of the new Bootstrap 3.0 powered grid. It's pretty unique, and whenever you get the hang of it, it's actually really easy to use. So whenever you're ready, head on to our next video, and we'll start with the grid. Hello and welcome back. Now let's talk about structuring your website. So here we need to get into the actual ins and outs of how the Bootstrap 12-column grid works. It's pretty unique, and again, you'll get the hang of it quite fast. The Bootstrap 3.0 grid system works on a mobile-first point of view. So what that gives us the ability to do is actually change grid configurations based on different viewports, or think of viewports like different mobile devices. So maybe a phone has one viewport, a tablet maybe has a larger, and then a desktop screen has the largest. The grid system is broken up into 12 columns that uses a unique set of naming conventions. Pretty good if you're going to be developing a lot of Twitter Bootstrap sites to commit these to memory. We deal with extra small devices, or column XL. We also deal with small devices, call small, or SM. Medium devices, call MD, and of course large devices, anything past 1200 pixels, or almost any desktop screen that you'd encounter, or column large, or COLLG. So they also change the maximum width of these columns, defaulting down to percentages whenever we get incredibly small or anything under 768 pixels. So, as an example, one might write columns in this way. You would start with a row, and then include columns 1 through 12 for literally 12 columns all the way across equally sized column medium 1. And so with column medium, you know that you're targeting a desktop device, right? So if we're going to mix and match mobile and desktop, we might mix that up a little bit. So we have a row, then you have on a small phone, this is actually going to be 12 columns, so it's going to be the full width. However, if we're on a desktop, then it's going to be 8 columns. And then next to that, we're going to have on a phone, column 6, so that's half. And then if we're on a desktop, so column medium, we're going to have 4. And so the best way to learn more about the grid really is to try and mix and match these columns yourself. And you'll see a little bit as we dive into our site again. The other idea that we need to kind of clear up is offsetting and nesting columns. So to offset a column means that we might have 4 columns of content on one side of the page, and then we might want to push our site over just a bit without actually having any additional content. So think about something that you might use for that, like a logo. So perhaps a logo is over on this side, and navigation doesn't actually have to start until we're on the other side, and there's several other iterations of things that we could think of in that manner. So to do that, we just use a standard offset. In this case, we have column medium 4, so that gives us our first through fourth columns of content there. And then we're offsetting this, so we have a column MD4, standard, same thing right there, but then we add an additional column medium offset by 4. And so what that does is we're taking into account the 12 columns, and since 4 goes 3 times into 12, we're simply pushing this div over by 1/3. And it works just like that. The next thing we'll go over is actually nesting our columns. So the way that you can think of this is that anytime we have any sort of column within our website, we're always resetting. So within a row, you'll have a full 12 columns, but within any given element, so here we have a 9-column area, we would actually have an additional row within that. And it would just, that row would stretch all the way through the 9 columns, but then it would allow us to nest additional 6 columns and 6. So you can imagine within a 9-column area, we could have half and half within that fairly easily. So before we continue on with this course, you might want to take a break and review the grid yourself. Start out with a blank page with Bootstrap loaded in, and play around with the columns with some placeholder text. I think you'll find it rather intuitive. And when you're ready, let's head on to the next video and we'll finish out our home page. Let's get ready and tackle the next 2 portions of our home page, our call to action as well as our 3 thumbnail areas. To do that, let's write a bit more code. So we've already started off our row. Let's denote that by commenting in that we're going to end that row. Looks good. And we'll open up that div. Okay, now we can get to work. So let's write in our call to action. I'm going to start off another div. You could also maybe use an aside or another element that you find more appropriate here. We're going to give that a class of column medium 8. So that's going to stretch about 3/4 of our area. But also we're going to augment that by offsetting it by 2, since we want to kind of center that area within our site. So we're going to add a col MD offset by 2. And then to style it, just in case we do need to, we'll actually denote an additional CSS class to this area. I'm going to call it welcome, since it's sort of a welcome message. Okay, close that up. And we will end with welcome. Next thing, let's just add our markup that finishes out our call to action. Let's put an H1 right there. Welcome to our website. Looks like we have a capital T there. And then we'll end with a paragraph. Then we'll just copy and paste some lorem text to fill this out. That should be good. Now let's check it in the browser. Go full screen. Refresh. All right, and it looks like we have our navigation, our slider, and our call to action. Again, we're going to style this in just a moment. Let's put in our thumbnail areas, and this is another Bootstrap component, but let's set in the grid items for right now. So I'm going to start up a brand new row. Think of this, kind of like Legos or something. Anytime you build blocks, that's a good way to think about Bootstrap rows. We'll have a div with a class of row. There we go. So we know that we are free and clear to have 12 additional columns within this row. We'll end that out. And we need a 4-column grid. So we'll open up a div, the class of column small 4, or column medium 4. That should be good. Then we'll end that div, and we'll call it or a third. That looks good. Now let's go grab our Bootstrap thumbnail component, and then we can paste that right on in here. We'll go out to Chrome and head over to Components, Thumbnails. That's looking just about how we'd like it, but that's even closer. So let's get this markup right here. Grab the div with the class of thumbnail. That's what we need. We will copy that, paste that right in to our markup. I'll add an annotation real quick. Perfect, so we know where that ends within our HTML. And then we will just take this, including the third, and paste that in 2 more times. And so, if we head back over to our site, refresh, we can see that we have the makings of a 3-column markup. So that's looking really, really good. All right, let's make sure that our images are in place. So I have our images with a source of image feature, and then I have a number denoting the image where it exactly is. And we will paste this in. Paste it in one more time. The only thing we need to correct here is we're no longer needing to pull a data src or a data source. So we can just pull the src attribute with these images. There we go. Now let's hover over this, and sure enough, it does detect it. So I think we're good to go. Let's refresh, and there's our images. That's perfect. Let's make sure and give them the right numbering. We'll have 2 and then 3. Perfect, and let's take these and paste in our headings and paragraph text. Two more times, we'll go there and get our additional text. Paste that in, and then we will get last time our text, and we will paste that in. All right, and refresh. Looks like we about got it. Let's see, we missed the middle button. We can go and switch those places. So we have a button primary there. And it needs to be a button default. We'll make sure that is primary. All right, let's paste that. Refresh one more time, and there we go. So we're on our way to marking up our site. The next thing we're going to take care of is our footer, and then we're going to begin styling our Bootstrap-powered website. I am about ready to finish the markup for our homepage. And to do that, of course, we need to complete the footer. We have a stay in touch area, maybe a larger piece of content about our company. It looks like we have a login with a possible form. And then, of course, we have a sub footer, and we're going to take care of all of that right now. All right, so let's open up our editor again and head down to the end of our last row. It's always a good place to start, so we know that we're free and clear to do what we need. But before we go any further, our client actually thinks that it would be kind of neat if our footer actually stretched the full width of the page. And how do we do that within Bootstrap, since we've been designing by this one container this entire time? It's kind of a safe zone. Well, that's actually pretty simple. We just need to create a new container. At any point in the page, no matter what the element is, you can actually create a container within another element that is full width. And so that lets us be flexible that way. We'll start out a new div, or actually a new footer, since that's the more semantic element here. A footer with a class of full width, just in case we need to do any exact measuring, and then an additional class of foot. That may seem like we're doubling over, but we're actually not. I might use the class of foot to single out that footer element, because we might use the footer element in other things. For instance, like a post or an article. You might have a footer to your article that's not the footer on your website. There we go. We're going to end that. But within our footer, of course, we're going to start with a brand new container. So open up a div with the class of container. And we will go ahead and add our commenting saying that we're going to end that container. There we go. Next thing, we're going to need to have a column wherein we place our stay in touch text. So we'll start out with a div, class of column small 6, and then an additional class of column medium. We're going to mix it up 3. Then we're going to also call this a widget, since it kind of is. It's kind of a widget within our footer. And then we're going to end up our classes, and we're going to close out our div. So we're going to end that column. Bring that in, and then let's paste in some text along with our markup. There it is, an H3 and a paragraph tag that's just to kind of fill this space up. Next thing, let's add to our container by placing a column, opening up another div, class of column small 6, and then add an additional column medium 6. So of course this is going to be larger than our column medium 3 that we had just a bit before, but we're going to call that a widget just the same. Alright, let's end that out, and we'll paste in some of our content. Looks like we have a couple paragraphs in there and maybe a heading, so that looks good. Alright, and then one more. I'm just going to paste in this whole thing, and then we'll talk it through. See that we missed the opening div tag. Alright, so we have a div with a class of small 6, so we know that on a small screen this is actually going to take up half of the screen, so that's like phones. And then on a medium screen, so from tablets to desktops, we're going to take up a column of 3, so it's going to equal out to the same width as our first column. And so we have 3 plus 3 plus 6, so 1, 2, and these two are 3 equaling up to 6 itself, and then of course we end up with the last 6 being in the middle. So it's kind of a neat, balanced layout. And then we're going to open up with a H3 tag right here with a client login. And then we're going to open up just a Bootstrap form. So it'd be a form with a class of foot form. And then we have our form group with the input of email, another form group with the input of password, and then just a button. If you'd like to know more about Bootstrap forms, head back over to the Bootstrap website. We'll go into the CSS, and then we'll head down to forms, and then you can see how to set up any form type or content that you might need. All right, we'll exit out of that, and then we'll simply save, and let's see what we have in the browser. All right, so we'll blow this up, and we will refresh. And if we head on down, there we have it. We have our Stay in Touch, our company, and that's a nice 6, along with our Bootstrap powered form. So let's make this small and let's see what happens. So once we've gone really small down to like a phone here, we can see that our navigation and our brand has changed out to be responsive. And so we can drop our responsive navigation down, in fact have different drop downs within that. Also, if we head further down, we can see that all of our footer elements, Stay in Touch, our company, are all now in line, and they're full width elements at the smallest phone size. But whenever we go a little bit larger, then we can see that in this case we would have 1/2, 1/2, and an additional half right here. But there is something that just kind of feels off about this. I don't think that the content flows the way that I want it to, and moreover, the client told us that they don't necessarily think that clients will be logging in on devices that are exceptionally small, so we can take steps to remedy that. We can actually hide divs or whole sections selectively depending on the device. All you need to do that is head over to Bootstrap, get into the documentation. Let's make our documentation a little bit bigger, and there we have it. And we're already on responsive utilities. So let's go to the available utilities. And so here I'm going to actually use a couple. I want to declare what this form is visible on. We for sure want it visible on medium devices. So that seems fine. Desktops that are quite large, and then also large devices. So really big desktops, that is okay. But our client doesn't want them visible on small and extra small phones. And we completely get it. We're going to accommodate that pretty easily. So what I've done is in our markup, I've gone ahead and put in classes of visible large and visible medium right there. Let's save that. Head back over to our site. And you can see here that we're at a large desktop, medium desktop. Once we hit our small, kind of a tablet, and then an extra small phone, nothing changes. We no longer see the form, but we are being responsive and responsible about our markup. And while looking at our code, there's actually a few things that we might have missed, and you might have caught it already. We did declare a container, and then we just got started on setting up all of our divs. Now, that's fine in some cases, but to be safe, it is best that we would have gone in and declared a row right there, since this is kind of a whole nother block of content. Let's end that row, and we will take this down to the bottom, to the end of our container. So we'll go down to where our container ends and type in another row. We'll refresh and see that that actually did line our content up a little bit better. So things are looking better. Our markup is saved. And we'll go past this container and we'll start a whole new container. To end our page, we need this little credits area that I talked to you guys about. And I'm just going to paste this in because it's a pretty quick explanation. Below our main footer, I'm going to open up another div with a class of credits. So let's check this out. We have our paragraph with a column medium 10. So we're planning on this taking up to 10 columns. So it's a pretty long little credits list. And then we have our copyright symbol along with our information. Then we have a little aside. So it's kind of a sidebar. It's not primary content to the area that we're in, with a class of social, because this is where we're placing our social icons. And then next, we're making use of that icon font library that we had found just before, and using the icon Facebook sign. Follow us on Facebook, giving that kind of a title, good SEO and good user experience. And we're making use of the icon Twitter sign. Now, we've made a couple of mistakes here, and those are easily remedied, right? So here we have a follow us on Facebook, and that seems good. And then we have a Twitter sign. And the title being follow us on Facebook doesn't quite make much sense there, so we'll change that out to follow us on Twitter. There we go. And just as how we did before, and it's good to kind of keep up with this, we need to make sure that this is found within a row. So we'll have a div with a class of row. And we will end our row. And let's take this. Let's get right before our container ends, and it looks like we're all done. Let's go and test it out and see what we look like. And as we go down here, we have our footer area. Let's go and make sure that this is stretching the full width. So full width footer and the full width credits. Looks like we're doing good. Oh, but you know what? There is something missing here, and that is our Twitter and Facebook signs. Let's make sure that they are operating properly. Let's head up to our head. Oh, doesn't look like we're making any call to that. So let's adjust this just a little bit. Below our bootstrap.css, we'll simply paste in our link to, and this is the Bootstrap CDN from NetDNA that we kind of reviewed a little bit earlier. We have a rel of style sheet, so this is just like a normal style sheet, except for it has nothing to do with the local files on our site. It's a good way to kind of keep your site fast with using a CDN, but also up to date. So that's kind of a nice, good tip to use those. Let's refresh. And there we have it. Our Facebook and Twitter signs are popping up appropriately. And so the next step we have is to get our site styled. We're going to do that using Less, the framework and the CSS preprocessor that is actually powering Twitter Bootstrap itself. And I'm going to show you how to use the power of Less to dynamically change the way that Bootstrap behaves and fit it in the way that we need our site to perform. So when you're ready, let's head over to the next video. Hi there and welcome back. Now it's time to start actually styling our site. Now, what we have is, it's kind of just a plain white website, and that's not at all what we're looking for, nor is it what our client is looking for. What we're trying to achieve is this sort of dynamic, engaging site that we have here in this image. To do that, we can start using some simple techniques. The very first file that we need to open is the variables.less. Now, you might be familiar with some of these modifiers, as they're actually the same modifiers that you'll find on the Bootstrap website under Customize. Only here we can actually play with them dynamically with our site. So it's a good practice just to start using this. The first thing that we want to do is actually change out this brand primary to this sort of purple. The brand primary is one of the colors that will be used the most throughout your site, and we're actually going to adjust even more elements of the Bootstrap CSS to reflect that. So let's pull that purple. The hex value on that is 3D3165. And as you can see, whenever we hover over that, we have that nice purple. The next place to go is down to the buttons, since this is not going to necessarily change immediately. We can see here that our buttons are importing the proper brand primary color under the primary button, and then we are importing all the rest of the proper colors throughout. The next thing that we need to do is head up, where we'll find our border radius. Okay, here we go. So we have our border radius base, our large, and our small. In this case, we're using very sharp corners on almost all of our elements. So border radius is not necessarily something that I'm concerned about right now. We'll take out these radiuses down to 0, 0, 0, and we will save. And we can see that we have compiled successfully. And right now, that's all we're going to change within our variables file. Next thing, let's head back over to our browser, and we will refresh this. Let me bring it up nice and large. And we can see that through our compilation, we no longer have border radiuses, but we still have this blue color. Now that shouldn't be. Whenever we head back over into our variables file, it looks like, yep, I still have that blue color somehow in our CSS. So let's take this and refresh that, and let's save that purple color right back in. We will change that, and upon compilation, of course, we get our purple button. So once we refresh, everything is the same. In fact, we've already changed most of our colors. Now the next thing that we have to deal with is we have this large background image. And that kind of steps beyond Bootstrap's natural abilities. It has nothing to do with the framework that Bootstrap offers, and that's okay. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to create an override file. We're going to go past what Bootstrap is originally designed to do. Because after all, this is a custom site. It doesn't have to just look like every other Bootstrap site. This is going to be our own. So let's do that. We have our main.css and it has nothing in it. So let's fix that. We can use the power of less to actually compile out a new main.css, and that seems quite efficient. So let's create a main.less. And in here, I'll just create a quick test case and call this, let's see, body. Give our body background. So black background. So that should be good. And we will save that. And we auto-compile, giving us this black background. But that's not at all what we're looking for. In fact, we're going to use another background. We're going to use a full-width image. So to do that, it's actually rather simple. We can have a background image. go over all of this with you. Paste this in. So I'm going to give a background URL, and it's going to be within our images folder under background.jpg. Moreover, we're going to use the WebKit background size modifier to cover our background. And what this does is it kind of auto-adjusts our background along with our website. So we're never without background. We always have it. And that's useful. The next thing that we're going to do is I see here in my navigation we're actually taking up too much room and we can't see all of the slider. Now in some Bootstrap default templates you might find they actually have inline CSS styles to do this, to add padding to the top. But in this case we're not going to. We're actually going to create our padding within our CSS file. So let's do that. Here we'll add padding top, 50 pixels. We'll see how that looks. It looks good. It looks like we're getting our full slider now, but we also have our page content to deal with. So do you remember the page content? It was the elements that wrapped our entire site. So if we inspect this, let's head over to page content. So our container page content, and as you can see here highlighted, it's everything that is wrapping our site right now. So we'll take this down and we'll add some more padding to our page content. This is the use of singling out those little areas that we want to modify. We'll add padding of 40 pixels, then maybe 15 pixels. So once we refresh, we can see that we've compiled down and we're actually even further away from the top, close to our goal padding. So that works. Alright, something I am seeing here though is we have our nav bar. Now I know that this is okay, but it's not the black nav bar that we're given in our website, and we can adjust that. The nice thing is we don't even have to adjust all of that within our main CSS. We can actually adjust that within the Bootstrap markup in the index file itself, because Bootstrap includes a dark and a light version of the nav bar. Let's head back over there. Head over to the index.html file. Let's find the navbar. We have our nav with the class of navbar default, navbar fixed top. And instead of the navbar default, we can just go with navbar inverse. Save that. Head back and refresh. And it looks like we have our black navbar, and that is looking pretty good. But there is one thing that we're missing. We do have a little bit of transparency on our old site. Now this would be something that we can adjust outside of our main.css because it's applicable within the variables.less. Let's head back over there and take care of that. Let's expand our code editor. Once we go into the variables.less, let's find our nav bar. Right, it looks like we have our navbar right here. We have the basics, navbar links, and we're dealing with the inverted navbar. So we have our colors right here. This is a great place to start. We have the gray light, that's the perfect color that works by us. But our inverse background, this needs to actually be a little bit transparent. So in this case, we're going to actually use a less function. The function is fade out. And so that's the same thing as writing, let's see, RGBA with our brackets and then saying 000.55. This is a faded out black color that's faded out by 55%. But that's not really what we're looking for. We can write it in a way that's easier to read. So let's write fade out black 25%. Now that's pretty easy. Let's see what we end up with. So once we compiled successfully, let's head back over to our page, and we can see that our navbar has now taken on that nice faded out, a little bit transparent look that we saw from our image. There we are, nicely faded. That works for me. In our next video, we're going to continue styling out our home page and kind of the rest of the elements. We'll center align our text and make sure that our footer gets the love it deserves. Whenever you're ready, head on over to the next video to get started with that. Hi there and welcome back. So we've already gotten finished with styling our main nav bar, as well as added some padding to our site to make it a little more manageable. The next thing that we need to do is adjust our row setup just a little bit. We want some space below each of the rows. So below each row, I'm going to add a margin bottom of 1.5 ems. An em is quite easy to understand. It really is just whatever 100% of your browser's standard font height, it just measures 1.5 of that. And so we have 1.5 ems. We'll save that. We've compiled successfully, and that's added a nice little bit of padding for us. So we need to style up our welcome portion. So we'll just open up a new target of welcome. Get some brackets. Then within that, we need both our heading 1 and our paragraph to behave sort of the same. We need each of those to have a text align of center and a color of white, and also a font weight. We need to lighten that font weight, so a font weight of 200. Refresh. That looks pretty good. Getting there right close to our image. I think we're doing pretty well. Next thing, we need to adjust our thumbnails. We can just take our thumbnails and open up a new target, and inside of that, let's throw in a caption. Anything that is a caption within there, let's give that a color of all threes with a text align center. Close and refresh that. That's looking pretty good. And that's not taking. Oh, I see why. Under our caption, we actually need to add a class. So there is a class of thumbnail and another div with the class of caption. Let's save and refresh that. And as we have it, all of our text is now center aligned. The next thing we need to do is actually adjust these thumbnail backgrounds. Right now they're white, and this is a standard Bootstrap component, and we can do that in the variables.less. So it's a standard Bootstrap component. You can do it in the variables. So we'll just search out thumbnail. And we'll see our thumbnail background is the same as the body background. And that doesn't really work for me, because in this case, I really want to have several areas that are kind of transparent. In fact, our content on our main pages is going to be a transparent kind of white that you can read over, but you can still see the background image. That's important. So to take care of this, we're going to take our thumbnail background, and instead of being at the body background, we're going to call that at the content background. And that variable doesn't exist yet, and that's okay. We're going to take content background and run up to the top of our variables under our colors, and then simply add content background to that, open that up, close it down, and we will throw in our color right here. For our color, we want to again engage that fade out function. So we'll fade out, close that down, white by 35%. Let's save that and refresh. And we can see that after we're compiled, our thumbnails get this nice transparent background. That's looking pretty good. Next, let's take care of our footer. Footer with a class of foot. Open that up, give that a background of 23. We'll also give that a color, so anything within that. Color of white. A font size of 85%. So let's save that and see what it does. Alright, so our footer now has a slightly smaller font size than our normal fonts would be, 85% of those. And we have everything with a nice white color and a dark background. In our image, we have these widgets, right? So these widgets kind of have a little border right here that we need to account for. So let's do the same process. So within our foot, we can actually embed or place elements directly within that. So For our footer, we're actually going to place widgets into that target, because we might also have widgets in another area of our site, like a sidebar, and we want to differentiate these. So within that, we'll open up the widget target and give it a margin top of 1.5 ems, a border right of 1 pixel, solid 1C, 1C, 1C. Go. The last child, so the last widget, we could add anything, and also the first child, we could add a few things. So the last child, we want to give it last child, border right, none. So for all of these widgets, we're anticipating that the border is, each of them are going to have a border right of a really dark gray. But the last widget, we actually don't want it to have a border on the right at all. And so to do that, we include using the less include denotation, and then with just the comma or the colon last child, just like the way you would in any form of CSS, then give that a border right of none. Also within the widgets, let's make sure that our paragraphs within those have a color of A, and then a line height. We're going to adjust this line height since we adjusted the font size of 1.5 em. So let's save that out, and that kind of darkens the color. Then of course on our last widget right here, we don't have any border. That's exactly what we want. For the form, I'm going to paste in a few values here. Under the foot form, we're going to have a box sizing, a border box, just to make sure in all browsers that we're acknowledging that everything in this is going to stay within kind of that content box. We're going to add paddings of everything of 1 em. We have a background darkening the background of our form of 232323 by 3%. And so we could create a variable here, but we're not going to do that right now. We also have a border radius of 0.5 em and a border of 1 pixel solid, a very dark gray. Save that. And here we have created successfully our client login form, just like we needed before. So let's style up Reddits. So under credits, open this up and give that a background of 1C, 1C, 1C. So this is kind of a very dark gray. We'll give that a border top of 2 pixels solid, and we just need to darken what we had before. So we'll darken 1C by only 1%. So kind of just a very subtle darkening. We also want a little bit of padding, right? So we have a padding 1 em by 0, a color in there of all A, and then a line height of 1.5 ems. Save that and see what we have on the very bottom in the credits section. Get our window down. That's looking good. Pretty close to where we need to be. Let's change out that social. So the social, we'll just keep on going within our less. Add in. There we go. Then any anchor within there. We'll get that a font size of 1.5 ems, so we want that to be pretty big. Margin left of 0.5 ems, so we're going to separate out those a little bit. We'll give those a color of lighten 1C, 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 10%. So you can imagine, just like our darken function darkened the 1C, we're actually just going to lighten that up a little bit. It keeps away from some of the guesswork when we just know that we want something to be a slightly lighter color than another. And then we have a text decoration. We want to make sure and get rid of that anchor text decoration. None. And then we want to make sure that we give the user an indication of whenever they hover over these links. So and hover. We'll change that color up to plain old C's. All right, let's save that after it compiles. Oh, looks like we're looking pretty good. And we have all of that done. The one thing I do want to do, though, is make sure that these social links are aligned to the right. And since we are only using anchors, and anchors are inline elements, we can simply add a text align under social. All right. We'll compile that. Check out our result. And that's perfect. We are perfectly lined up. All right, so that wasn't too hard at all. We have a fully functional and styled homepage ready for more management from our client. We're looking pretty good. Up next, we'll go ahead and take care of our about page, our inner page content. Welcome back. Let's get started on our About page. But before we head over to the About page, I have opened up our index.html because, as you can see, within our target site, we need to adjust the header. Just a little bit. We need to get the header correct. We'll adjust the branding and the nav bar to make sure that we have the correct pages listed. To do that, simply head over to our navigation. You can see that within our plain index. Right there, everything's looking pretty good. And we want to get rid of this li in that form. I think we'll just keep this ul. So the primary unordered list, and then we have a link. It looks like we have one with a drop down. We don't really need that. We don't need a drop down for our current menu, but you could always add a drop down as you see fit. Bootstrap's neat and useful like that. So let's start editing. We'll have our home, about us page. That'll be our inner content page, our blog, and also our contact page. Once we save, clean this up just a bit, and then I will save that out. And we'll head over to our site, refresh, and there we have it. Our brand, our home, about us, blog, and contact. Well, now let's change that brand title treatment. So under our nav bar, you can find the nav bar brand and just give it the name of Clear Step. There we go. And let's also give this a title. Attribute of the very same thing, so Clear Step. Once we jump into our browser and refresh, we have our Clear Step, and we also have our tooltip, kind of our web title of Clear Step as well. That's a good practice to do with your titles, your site titles. It's important for the browser to know. The only other thing is we see that this text is centered. So it's centered almost along with our container. And that works. We can use a centered container within our header. So let's do that now. So we have all of this. One more time, find our nav. Then we can erase this comment. Right under or above nav bar header, create a div with a Bootstrap class of container. In that, I have a commented version ready to go. Paste that right in, ending our container. Make sure. And we will refresh. All right, so we have our container. Let's make sure our responsive navigation is still functioning. As we go smaller, we remain nicely responsive, which is quite nice. All right, so now we can head on to customizing our About page. For our About page, we're looking for kind of a clever use of content, but a familiar enough environment so readers won't be put off by the general look of it. Well, this is a page that is meant for our clients to be able to place content in that's simply intuitive. To begin developing this out, let's head over back to our editor and open our about.html file. As you can see here, I've emptied out our container and page content. We can reuse elements of our home page because essentially we do have the same wrappers. We're just going to put different content within it. To begin our main page content, I am going to open up a new ordered list because the elements heading within this will be ordered. So open up an ordered list and we'll give that a class, a Bootstrap class of breadcrumb. If you'd like to know a little bit more about the breadcrumb module, head over to the Bootstrap documentation and head over to breadcrumbs. This will give us this sort of breadcrumb-like structure that's already been pre-done for us. This is excellent in both its presentation and semantics. Some people might be tempted to just place anchor tags within the breadcrumbs and maybe an unordered list because it's one of those lists that you just use all the times. But in fact, we really should use an ordered list because we're kind of going down an ordered hierarchy of pages to our current content and back up. So we're going to paste in or use this breadcrumb. And it's easy enough to just give something a class of active. You can just give that a class of active and it'll take care of all the styling within that component. So we'll open up the breadcrumbs and then we'll let our readers know where they are. Open up an li, then a with an href, and then we'll give that actually page of index.html since this is going to be our home page. We'll just send that home and let's duplicate this one time. All right, looks like we've got it. And one more time, and we'll just change this over to our about, since this is going to be our about page. And you could see how maybe you could place this within another content management system like WordPress or even just within a static site, but you're always letting the reader be aware of where they are within your website. It's good use of UI. All right, so we can head over to this and we'll head into our about.html. And so we have our footer, we have our header, and now we have our home and about. We have no border radius because earlier in our CSS, we used less to compile the fact out that we don't want a border radius on any of our elements, except for ones that we specifically select. So that works. Next thing we need to do is add our page content. So we'll open up a header element. Since this is sort of going to be the header or the heading of our article. And we'll give that header element a class of page header. All right, that looks good. Now, open up an h1 and give that a span with a class of icon rocket. So this is going to use our font awesome icon fonts to achieve a rocket look right next to our page header. Rocket icon. Then we'll just give ourselves the title about our company. Save that. And we can see now that we do have our page header. And then we will open up an article. So this is actually going to be our article content. And I'm just going to paste in some page content here. So we opened up an article with a class of column medium 8. We don't really need to change this whenever the screen goes smaller. We anticipate that this is going to stretch the full width of our mobile devices whenever we're on something like an iPhone. So right now at a column medium 8, that's what we're looking for. We're also going to include a sidebar within our page content and within this page container. Our sidebar will be a column medium 4, so 4 plus 8 of course is 12. So we've added up to that 12th grid and this will fit within our row. One more thing is we do need to place a row within all of this. So we'll open up a div with a class of row and we will close that out by commenting our row. And paste that down past the end of all of our content. All right, so we refresh, and there we have it. This looks good. We do need to, however, change the color of our text and make sure that our pictures are working. Let's take a look at the code. Oh, and we can see that our image, we no longer need that holder folder, so I can just save that, refresh, and there is our image. You should take note that we did use a special type of list or menu on the side, and this can be used for things like navigation, but it's also just really nice looking UI for lists. And this is called a Bootstrap list group. All right, and if you need to find out a little bit more about that list group, head over to the Bootstrap site, get bootstrap.com/components. Let's see what we have in our sidebar. We go down and there it is, list group. So you can kind of see what they're doing here with list group. You can add things like badges, and that's already sort of pre-done for you. We can link different items within that. And we can also just add custom content. So these are flexible. These are really nice things to have on your sidebar, and they really feature content well. And they're rather unique looking. They look a lot like your brand. It's something that kind of stands out. Let's head back over to our site and we'll refresh. And there we have it. Let's get styling on our content. Let's finish out our About page by adjusting the styling and making sure that we're in proper sync with our branding. So the first thing that we're going to do is, of course, this text is a little bit hard to read on a nice picturesque background. It's dark text, it doesn't really work, but this sort of white color here, that does kind of work, so let's make use of that. So our page content within our main.less file, remember we're going to use less to compile this file out, and we're going to use that to place upon our site. So right below page content, let's open up another one and call that page header, because that's what we need to adjust. And we'll take that, and I'm going to give the page header, I'm going to give those the H1 a color of EA, at border bottom of 1 pixel, and we'll kind of fade out black there. We'll want to make that a little bit nice and dark, but still sort of see-through. Fade out black. And we'll fade that out by 80%. So we're going to perform that less calculation to make sure that we fade out black by 80%. We'll give that a margin top. I don't really want a margin top on the page header. We don't need it. Margin top of 0. And let's save that. And so after we've compiled, we no longer have the margin top. We have that kind of nice faded look. And of course, our title is that nice sort of grayish EA color. I like that. It's kind of subtle, but it still looks pretty good. Next thing that we need to do is adjust the H1 itself. I want to do a little bit more work there. So the H1, I'm going to give that one another margin top of 0. We'll see how that looks. Perfect. You know what? It looks like our font awesome icon font is not appearing. Let's go find what the problem is. Head back over to the about.html. You have the H1 with the span with the class of icon rocket. That looks good. Oh, and our class is actually written wrong, so we need one more S in that class. We need to be able to identify that as a class. Save that and refresh, and there is our icon font. That's good news. Let's head back over to our main.less. The next thing that we need to do is adjust that. So we'll take the span there. We can just make that a generalization. Since we're already within the page header, we know that we're looking for the span, and you can place that span within that page header bracket, and less is going to auto-compile that out to make sure that it's in the right spot in your CSS. So we'll add there a margin right of 0.5 em. So we wanted about half a letter over. We want that to look about right, and that looks good. So after we refreshed, we've compiled, of course, and there it is, 0.5 em away from about our company. Next thing is I do want to fade out that color. I don't want it to be so bold. And so we'll go color, and I'll say fade out. Remember, this is a less function. It's a part of Bootstrap, but it's also just a really good thing to use in your day-to-day CSS. You can maybe try out less or another pre-compiling language called Sass or Stylus. And we'll fade that out by 70%. Save that. Oh, that looks pretty good. So we've kind of made that a little bit more subtle, cleaned it up a little bit. It's not yet, because this is really what we want our reader to be looking at. It's the title, and we don't really care too much about the icon, but it's just a nice stylistic touch. Next thing we have, of course, is our main content, our color for that pieces of content, and we can adjust that. We could adjust it in our main.less but we really don't need to. We don't need to override that. We need to replace that since it's going to be something that's going to be site-wide. Everywhere where there's going to be page content, we want that lettering and that CSS to show that our words are going to be white. So we can head back over to the variables. Once we're in those variables, we can see that we have under scaffolding, our body background is a white, but we're actually really using an image there, so that doesn't matter. But our text color is a dark gray. So if we head back over to our site, we can see that that's the dark gray. We don't really need to use that, but we do want that sort of EA, the light gray color. So we'll make that, adjust that, and there's our final compile. And there we have it, our light gray font. That looks really, really nice. Last thing is we need to adjust our stay in touch. So for this one, this doesn't quite work for me. We need to adjust this to go with our footer the way that we want it. And remember that Bootstrap is entirely customizable. That's kind of the point about this. This is a good framework to start from, and then we can build our styles on top of that. So let's head back over to the main.less, into the foot, and I'm just going to paste in some code, then we can talk it through. So I have nav pills. That's sort of these pills found within our footer that we did earlier. We want to isolate that line item and then take any anchor tags within those line items. And then we're going to make that color a nice white. Whenever we hover over those, we're going to continue that color being white, but instead of having another white background on hover, we're going to actually darken the color 232323, which is a very dark gray color. We're going to darken that by about 3.5%. We want this kind of smoky darkness back there that'll look really, really nice. So once we save that, we've compiled successfully, and there we have it. Whenever we hover over our stay in touch links, it looks really, really nice. All right, the very last thing that we have to finish out our styling, of course, over here we have this nice dark breadcrumb area, and we need to make that same effect for ourselves. Once again, we're not necessarily going to do this within the main.less. We simply don't need to. Anywhere throughout the site, we want to make sure that this is done. So head over to the variables.less and we'll find our breadcrumbs. So there's breadcrumbs background. And for this background, we're going to perform another less function. We'll fade out that black by about 65%, so it's going to be nice and transparent. We're going to keep the rest of the settings though, because these really work sort of no matter what the background color. So that'll be a nice CCC and then our gray light color. So let's compile this. Looks like we need to adjust our anchor text within that. To do that, head over back to your main.less, since this is just for this instance, and we can isolate out our breadcrumb, the anchor within the breadcrumbs, and let's give that a color of CCC, a text decoration of none. We don't want any text decoration. On hover, so we'll press and colon hover. So this is giving less this hover selector. And it's going to intelligently place that at the end of our CSS, so we know that it's cascading properly. On hover, we want to adjust that color to white. So we're going to lighten that. Then we'll give that text decoration a value of none one more time. And you want to do that and make sure, because in some browsers we do default to hovering and then returning anchors to that text decoration of an underline. But in this case, we're actually just on hover. We're lightening the color, so we're still giving the user that feedback. It's just a little bit more subtle in this case. So save, and there we have it. We have our CCC, so it's that nice sort of dark, and then anytime we hover over it, it looks really, really nice. We've completed the primary styling for our whole website. So from here, you can imagine how you could expand on this. You could create your contact page, your blog page. You could fill out the rest of your website and you'd be good to go. We've set up that base. And hopefully you've learned a few things about how to deal with Bootstrap and some of its components. And remember, if you ever do have any questions, do what I do in this case and head over to the Bootstrap documentation. It's constantly being updated with great code examples that you can copy and paste right into your own designs and projects, and then customize yourself via the variables.less file and maybe creating your own main.less file or any other name you'd like to give it, and adding your own less code on top of your Bootstrap. In our next videos, we'll go over optimization and deployment onto a server, and how to get your website from your desktop onto the web. So when you're ready to dive in, head on to the next video. Hello there and welcome back. We've completed building our Bootstrap 3.0 website. It looks good, it's functional, and has a lot of really neat features. So what's next? We're ready to look at deploying our site to a server of its own. So what we need to do is discuss shortly about how we're going to manage all of the portions of our website once it's up on the server. It only makes sense to make that as easy as possible. So one of the things we're going to do is use PHP includes. Basically, what that's going to accomplish is we will be able to section off our site into repeatable and manageable portions that will repeat themselves throughout each and every page. So let's take a look at this page and let's see what we could possibly repeat. Well, we know that our header up here is never going to change, and if it does, we want that change to be made throughout the entire site. You don't want to be going from page to page making those updates. Also, our footer is largely going to stay exactly the same. So we can use a technology called PHP includes. And you can use any language of your choice, but I prefer to use PHP for this particular use case. You can read more about PHP includes on the PHP manual website. It's just php.net. And writing up an include is fairly simple. For instance, I will take and we can maybe open up a new file. I'll just rename this example.php. Okay, and so an include is fairly simple. In its construction, we just open up with PHP tags. So bracket question mark PHP, and then in that with another question mark and another bracket. Inside of that, we simply state include, open parentheses, and close that off kind of like a JavaScript statement. Within that, we can set a file path. For instance, we might have an includes folder, and then we'll have a header.php. And that is a valid PHP include. Great, so we know how to write one, but we also need a PHP server locally on our machine to be able to test these things accurately. Since I'm on Windows, I make use of a technology called Microsoft Web Matrix. It lets me set up an automatic PHP server depending on any folder that I'd like. However, if you are on a Mac or if you just don't want to use Web Matrix, check out MAMP or MAMP Pro for the Mac. It's a very simple one-click install web server, and it gives you an htdocs folder that you'll be able to test your site in. Also, if you're on Windows and you'd like to use the same technology, use WAMP server. It's a really great server, and it's just as easy to install. Web Matrix by Microsoft is what I'm going to be using today. In my experience, it's quick and easy to use and easy to set up to get started on a very small scale site like the one we'll be editing today. So let's get hooked in. I'll open up Web Matrix, go to Open, find our folder. All right, we need to find our desktop and then Clear Step. So we have our Clear Step folder, looks good, and we'll select that folder. The system will auto-detect what type of program or programming language that we'll need or we will be using. We'll open up our index.html file, and we're all ready to go. In our next video, we'll go over extracting your code and then placing that into their own include files ready to upload onto our web server. Welcome back. it's time to get our include files set up and ready for deployment. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is create a new folder within our ClearStep directory. To do that, simply add a new folder. I'm going to name this Inc or Includes. You can add either. I just like the abbreviation as it stays consistent with the rest of my folders. Next thing, we know that in our site, we're going to be extracting the header and the footer. Now remember, for includes, you could do this for any sort of page type or file type. If you had a sidebar that you wanted to repeat across several pages, but you only wanted to edit once, and then include those into other files. So you could imagine that whenever we go back, this could be packed with all sorts of other files like sidebar.php or even a slider.php. But in this case, we're just going to create a PHP file and name it header.php. All of this can be erased. And then we'll also create another include file, name that footer.php. Looks like I already got the extension, okay. And we'll delete that. So we need to go and grab the portions of our markup that include our header and our footer. This is really pretty simple since on each of our pages we have a container with a class of page content. We can assume that everything above that, including our navigation, is essentially a part of our header. Simply drag and copy all of that, go over to the header and paste that right in. Next thing, we can go back to our index and delete that. We will head down to our footer. So we can see that our container from above was ended there. We can grab all of our footer, copy, and head over to our footer.php and save that. So if we were to launch this right now, we wouldn't have very much. So let's launch this in Google Chrome, and you can see the site is just broken. That's because nothing from what we had is being included from within our header or our footer files, and we need to correct that. Exit that. So this is all the markup that makes up our inner page content, but we need to take a note from what we did before and write a PHP include. So we'll write, open up those PHP tags, PHP, make sure and close those. Write an include, and that is within the inc/header.php. We can copy this, and go right back down to our footer, and name that footer.php. Now let's launch this one more time. Looks like it's still broken, but we expected that. The reason this is broken is because we still need to rename our index.html file. The browser right now understands that it's processing an HTML file. What it needs to know is that we need it to process a PHP file. Whenever it begins to process the PHP file, our PHP includes will begin to work. Rename the HTML file. Give that the extension of PHP. And as you can see, some of our coloring has changed. So something else that we want to be sure about is that this statement is still not going to work unless we add in our quotation marks. So the quotation mark inside the parentheses, sort of like JavaScript and adding a string, it gives PHP the ability to read in what is between these. So include the quotation marks in both of those statements. And we'll save that. All right, now let's run this page. And there we go. Nothing has changed because if we view the source, all of the header and footer that we had in there at one point is back just the way it would be, except for now this page is much more manageable to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And if we wanted to edit just the items in our header, like our navigation, if you wanted to add a new page, we don't have to go back to the index.php. We can simply edit the header. Let's add these PHP includes into our about page, and we'll be all done. So we can head over to our about. One more time, we'll get rid of that header, include that header.php. Same thing on the footer. Get rid of that, open up about, and everything under the footer will be okay. We need to change the name to about.php. Alright, there we go. We can save that. So we have our page named about.php. Head over to the header, and I've already changed the file extensions in our navigation to index.php and about.php. Now if we head back over to our index and we run this, we know that our about and home will work as we expect. And that's it. We've added PHP includes to our project. Now that we've gotten our site set up using PHP includes, we need to discuss some other front-end techniques that we can use that will make our site run a little bit faster. We're going to be more responsible with our files. Since this website is a static website, it's already going to be pretty fast. However, we are serving a lot of images, and pretty large ones at that. And so whenever we are going to deploy our website to the server, optimization really is the name of the game. We can do a few things that can really save us some time. Using the tool preprocess, or if you're on a Mac, of course, CodeKit does a wonderful job. We have already been compiling our bootstrap.js and our main.minimum.js, and so that's all good. But on our bootstrap.less, we have already compressed that as well. So that is all good things that we've done. However, on our main.less, our files that we have used to override our bootstrap styles, we haven't. And that's something that we need to correct. So if we head over to the page and then just view our source, we can see that the bootstrap is just one big block of code. You can't really read it, but that's great. There's no white space to get in the way of the browser processing your CSS. That's going to make sure that it's speedy. Next, however, we do have our style sheet under main.css, and if we go in here, it's very readable to the human eye, and even though this style sheet is not huge, it's very speedy just by itself. If you were to ever expand on the concept of this website and add a lot more styles, you would want to serve a minified CSS file. So we can take the preprocess, we can just select compress CSS. We could auto-prefix this, but we're pretty confident in the prefixes that we already have, and plus we're not using a lot of CSS3 techniques. We can compile this. Once it's compiled, we can refresh this page. Now that we've refreshed, you can see that our CSS is completely minified and a whole lot smaller. This makes it faster for the browser to be able to process through it. The next thing that we need to do is take care of these images. Images are large, and there's not really a lot of ways to get through that. You do want to send over high-quality imagery, and sometimes it's just going to be a little large to download. There are techniques to avoid that, such as spriting images if you were using a lot of image icons, but we're already using icon fonts, so we've gotten ahead of that a little bit and made some good decisions. However, using preprocess or CodeKit, you can just go through and optimize all of the images in your product. We can go through here and just optimize each image. And this, all it's going to do is compress the size of our images. So for instance, whenever we inspect our H1 image, our hero, we can see that it is actually 69 kilobytes. That's pretty small. But whenever we do take it and use our preprocessor on it, so that's our H1, and we can optimize that image. Now, whenever we refresh, we should get maybe even a small savings. In this case, we're only going down to about 68.8 kilobytes. Since our image is already pretty optimized, we've used some good imagery in the first place. You can imagine how, if you were using an image straight out of Photoshop or a large file, how using the preprocessor might be able to save you a lot of time and headache and load time for your clients. So let's complete optimizing our images. And we're all done. We can exit out of this, and one more thing I'd like to adjust while we're here is making sure that our logo is heading over to our main index. I can open up Web Matrix and edit again the header, and as you can see here, we have our home that is headed toward index.php. However, our brand with the title of ClearStep is not, it's just a number sign, so we can just point that right back to index.php. Now that we've saved that, we're ready for deployment. In our next video, we'll pack everything up and deploy the ClearStep website on our web host. Hello there and welcome back. Now we've completely optimized our Bootstrap built website and we're ready to deploy it on our web host. In order to deploy our website, we need a few things. First of all, you'll need a domain. To do that, I recommend domain.com or hover.com or even godaddy.com for your domain. Next thing, you're going to need a host. You need a place to point your domain to host your files. For that, I recommend Media Temple. If you need a server that is really high performing, if you're planning on having a lot of traffic, Media Temple is a really great option. Also, Site5 is a site that I personally host my websites on. They've always treated me well, and so I do recommend their services. If you need a less expensive host, then Bluehost is a really good place to get started. At any rate, you'll need to upload your website to your host. In this case, I have created a directory for my website at my current host. Under that, it is brocknunn.com/clearstep. So I'm going to take my files from our project. This is the correct one. We have our index and about PHP with our includes. That looks pretty good. Let's check out the size of our image folder. So our image folder total weight is about 295 kilobytes. That's pretty good. The next thing we'll need to do from here is actually upload our files via FTP or another method that you prefer. To do that, you need an FTP tool, something to get the files from your desktop to our server. If you are on a PC or a Mac, I highly recommend FileZilla. It's a time-tested FTP tool, and it's what I personally use on my Windows machine. If you are on a Mac, however, the FTP client Transmit, it really doesn't get a lot better than that. It's a great FTP client to use. CyberDuck, on the other hand, is an open source FTP client that is also excellent. However, right now, for my purposes, FileZilla will fit just fine. I can open up ClearStep, file structure, open up FileZilla, and I've already connected to my server using FileZilla, and I have created a ClearStep directory in my public HTML files. From here, I can just drag all of my files and then upload. We have successfully uploaded. Now we can go check it out on the web. So if we head over to brocknunn.com/ClearStep, we see our site. We have our ClearStep, home, and about us. Perfect. That's exactly what we want. And congratulations, you have now created and deployed your own Bootstrap-powered website. Remember, people use Bootstrap to power a huge number of web applications. If you need to quickly prototype your next web app, or you need to personalize your personal site, Bootstrap is a tremendous place to get started. And remember, CSS is not the only thing that Bootstrap offers. You can jump into the JavaScript and that documentation by heading over to JavaScript and looking through all of the JavaScript-based elements. But moreover, you should look into customizing the JavaScript that you use. And you can select the JavaScript plugins that you want to use or not use by simply ticking a few boxes and downloading your JavaScript file. That way you can keep your Bootstrap site nice and light. If, however, you are more of a web savant and you would like to start contributing to the open source web, Bootstrap is a fantastic place to start. If you have ideas for how you can make Bootstrap better, head over to GitHub and locate the Bootstrap repository. From here, you can download the latest versions of Bootstrap as well as contribute things yourself. Need a place to get started? Simply head over to the issues, and from this area, you can actually find a large amount of issues that you very well may be able to handle and to help out the community yourself. And that's that. I hope you have enjoyed building with Bootstrap. I've certainly enjoyed being your instructor throughout this course. If you'd like to keep up with me day to day, you can follow me on Twitter at BANunn, N-U-N-N. Until next time, thank you for letting me be your instructor as we build together with Bootstrap. I have certainly enjoyed it, and I hope you got a lot out of it too. Remember to keep practicing and experimenting with your designs. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.